Happy Blue Friday, everyone. For those of you who celebrate, welcome to Seahawks Forever. I'm Dan. Today we're going to talk about the possibility of Seahawks general manager John Schneider doing something he has never done. He's traded up before, but he's never traded up in the first round. And with what we know about this draft, how it's graded at the top, where the Seahawks sit at 18, and with some extra draft capital in their hip pocket, might this be the year that he breaks his cycle and actually moves up? I'm going to give you some specific scenarios all the way up to number 10 in this draft using the trade value charts on what is possible, what it would cost to move up into different spots in the draft, and then the players I believe, the only players that I believe would be worth trading up for. Is it going to happen? We're going to talk about it next on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Doer is built for doing lifestyle apparel for every occasion. A very proud sponsor of this program. They have flagship stores in Denver and LA, but this is the only store you need. This is shopdoer.com, and it's spelled D-U-E-R. These right here, these stretch performance jeans, are my all-time favorites. They have 20% stretch in them. They are incredibly versatile. They're comfortable. They move with you, but they are also built tough. They are built for doing. And right now, if you go to this special URL just for viewers and listeners of this program, you can get 20% off your first order. That's shopdoer.com/forever. Shopdoer, DUER.com/forever for 20% off your first order. All right, guys, welcome back in. We're getting closer. We are less than a month away now. In fact, 4 weeks from tonight, we will be on day 2 of this draft. And, normally day 1 is where all the fun happens. But this year, with the Seahawks, for the time being, owning 4 of the picks on day 2, that's where all the action's going to be at. So much so that actually this year, the Seahawks, they don't always throw a draft party. There have been years where they didn't. And one of the reasons that they didn't hold draft parties at times in the past is because John Schneider gained such a reputation for trading down that if they were drafting in the mid to late 20s because they were coming off a good season, like the possibility he was going to trade out of the first round was so great they wouldn't throw a big party for it, right? Last draft party of theirs that I went to was the year that Jermaine Ifedi was drafted. But this year they're actually having a party on the first and second night. And unfortunately, because I can claim 4 tickets as a season ticket holder, I was gonna do a little contest and like give those out, but they are not transferable, unfortunately, because that would be a lot of fun. But just a reminder, since we are less than a month out now, that I will be going live, doing live watch parties start to finish, both day 1 and day 2, so we can watch the draft together off screen, not on screen. I learned that lesson a couple of years ago. I'll tell you that story on that night. Actually turned out to be sort of a hidden gem or a silver lining, I guess you would say, and really helped teach me some lessons and contribute to the growth of the channel. Anyway, speaking of that, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and hit that bell button for notification of future episodes. And all the other ways you can support me and or the channel are linked down below in the description. So as I said, John, for years there, it was almost assumed. We just knew he was going to trade down. He loved his draft capital so much. And there was a period of time there of a number of years where I think the number was, this is just off the top of my head. I guess I could look it up if I wanted to. I do have a computer right here in front of me. But there was a pretty long stretch there where they always had a minimum of 10 picks in a draft. And sometimes they would have 12 or 13. But then something happened. And that something, I believe, was 2019 happened. Was that the year that they traded Frank Clark? So Frank Clark was at the end of his rookie contract. They franchise tagged him. He was coming off a big year. He was seeking a contract that would have him be one of the highest paid edge players in the league. And at that time, that meant $20 million a year. And the Seahawks either A, just didn't feel like paying an edge player $20 million a year, at that time, they still had some of their big stars on contracts, and they had a franchise quarterback making top money, right? Or they just didn't feel like Frank Clark was worth that. And so they traded him to the Kansas City Chiefs, got a first-round draft pick back in return. And this, I am going to go to the computer for this because I want to see this list again. But that particular year, they were in dire need of defensive line help. They had Jaron Reed, and they had Frank Clark, and they were coming off that year where the two of them had double-digit sacks, and they were a great tandem. But outside of Jay Reed, once they traded Frank Clark, the cupboard was pretty bare. And I've talked about this a lot, sort of analogous to where we sit with the offensive line, where for years that was the biggest black mark on this roster that Schneider and Carroll just could not get out in front of. They were always playing catch up. And so they always had to do these either late summer or mid-season deals for guys like Sheldon Richardson for a second-round pick. 1 year and walked. Jadeveon Clowney, we know what happened there. Carlos Dunlap midway through the season. Then ultimately 2 years ago, Leonard Williams. And then they drafted Byron Murphy. And now it feels like we're ahead, right? And we need to keep adding to that group so that it can remain a strength. Well, that particular year, that position group was pretty barren, but it was also a very, very good defensive line draft. And hang on, if I can just find it here. My goodness, you'd think I would be prepared. It's okay. I'll get good at this one of these days, you guys. I will. I promise. All right. So I just want to just go back over this, just give you an idea of what this draft class looked like. So top of the draft, they weren't going to have a shot at these guys, right? Quinnen Williams, Cleveland Farrell went fourth. That was a reach. Josh Hines Allen, Ed Oliver, Rashawn Gary, Christian Wilkins, Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, Jeffrey Simmons, who slipped in the draft, slipped to 19th because he was coming off an ACL. It's even better than I remember it. And then Montez Sweat at 26, Jerry Tillery. What happened is the Seahawks liked a couple of these guys a lot. Reportedly, they were very high on Rashawn Gary and didn't think there was any way that he was going to go as high as 12. He did. And so they traded down, thinking, I remember the reports at the time were Jerry Tillery was the perfect guy to pivot to. That's the guy they liked. He was long, he was big, he could play inside and outside coming out of Notre Dame. So they traded back to 29, or they traded back, it was the pick that they got from the Chiefs. They traded back to 29, thinking they could still get Tillery there. He was their plan B. Tillery got sniped one pick before by the LA Chargers, and they never really turned out to be the kind of player that they wanted him to be or expected him to. So then the Seahawks had to go to plan C and take LJ Collier at 29. We know what happened there. Ever since that draft, in fact, I don't think he's traded down at all since that draft. When you look at the 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24 drafts. So, as much as we like to beat up on John sometimes for his decisions, and some of you think he should be fired, he has adapted his methods and his process along the way. Sometimes to a fault. I think there are times where he has become a little too risk averse, because of not only what happened this year, but also the year that they traded down all the way out of the first round and the second round and ended up with Malik McDowell. We know what happened there. So ever since then, he's been a lot more willing to stick and pick, but he's never traded up in the first round. He has traded up later in the draft, and he's done quite well with this. Whereas, there are a number of people, I know Seaside Joe one time did it. I know Field Goals has done this, where they've cataloged all of his trade downs and the players that he ended up with. And it's pretty easy in a number of those years to look back and go, well, we should have stayed where we were. We would have been better off. Consequently, his trades up have often bore really, really delicious fruit. Tyler Lockett was the result of a trade up. So was DK Metcalf. So that great wide receiver room that we both just showed the door to this offseason, both the results of trading up. Jaron Reed was a result of trading up. Darrell Taylor, who I know obviously that, got to the end of his rookie contract, didn't get a second contract, but he was a relevant, productive contributing player. There was good value there. They traded up to get him. They traded up famously to get Michael Dixon one year. Traded ahead of the Denver Broncos, or did we trade with the Denver Broncos to come up and take a punter? And it went viral that they were kind of laughing at us for the pick. And I don't remember who they ended up getting with the pick we traded to them. But Michael Dixon has turned out to be a pretty good pick. Broncos. Okay, so calm down. But he's never traded up in the first round. So I wanted to look at the possibility that they would this year. And this is why. Because already I've seen some of you in the comments. Here, let's do this. Already, some of you. No thanks on trading up. If anything, I'm more interested in trading back, getting more draft capital. X-Wing. I'd be okay with a trade back into the first round from later, right? But only for a couple specific players. Possibly Loveland, Grant, Campbell, Warren. Unlikely to happen. Here we go. Brendan says a trade up seems unlikely, but interesting to think about. Thus, it is the subject of tonight's show. It's usually how these shows come about. More of them, I'll peel back the curtain a little bit. More of my show ideas come from random thoughts, just because that's the way my brain works. It's always thinking. I'll be laying in bed. I'll be waking up in the morning. I'll be cooking. I'll be driving. I wonder about this. Well, let's do a show on it, right? As opposed to sitting down with a calendar and kind of mapping out like what would make sense. They're a little bit more inspired that way, I think. So I wanted to take a look at what it would take to trade up, how much it would cost, and why they might do it. Let me start with that. This draft is unique. We've heard about it a lot. We just heard yesterday James Foster talking about it with me from the 33rd team. And by the way, guys, if you haven't watched that episode yet, it's one of my favorite interviews I ever did. James is a young content creator that's been doing draft analysis and building big boards and doing profiles for 5 years now. And he built the best draft board I've ever seen. It's interactive. It's 307 players deep. It's unbelievable. It's free. And since I'm talking about it now, I'll make sure to link it down below. After we're done here, I'll go back in and edit the description. But James Foster, it's No Flags Film is his Twitter handle. Go look him up there. The link is his pinned tweet on his Twitter handle. But one of the best interviews I've ever done. This guy is so knowledgeable. I can't wait to have him back on the show after the draft and help break some things down. Really, really intelligent conversation. I think you guys don't like that. Anyway, he talked about it as well. And you've heard it from everyone from Daniel Jeremiah to Jordan Reed to Matt Miller. All these guys talking about how it's this draft lacks at the top. It lacks in bona fide, no doubt, blue chip prospects at the top of the draft. And then from about 10 to anywhere from 70, 80, and some people will even claim all the way through the top 100, the talent level is very even across a number of key personnel groups and position groups. And so trading up when you're sitting at 18 could make sense if a player that you have graded as a first round grade, and most teams this year seem to have around 10, it's about half of what they normally have. If you're the Seahawks and you're sitting there and you're seeing all your guys go, first of all, that top 10 is going to be really painful for them because they're going to have their board, they're going to have their true first round grades, and all those guys are just going to start getting picked off. But if one or two particular players slip through and you get to 10, 11, 12, and you start thinking, we have this extra draft capital, that makes it possible this year. Usually when you do this exercise and you just have your full assortment of 7 native picks, 1 in each round, it becomes a lot harder to trade up without trading future ones. You don't want to do that this year because of what I just talked about. It lacks at the top, but next year's draft is already considered to be much, much better at the top, not just at quarterback, although that's a key, and then some other position groups as well. And so you don't want to give up a 1 next year. That's why no one has up until this point. As we sit here today, less than a month away from the draft now, we have already set a record for closest to the draft without anyone trading their first round pick. All 32 picks are each team's native pick. That just doesn't happen. It's very, very rare. But as we get closer, all it takes is one team falling in love with a certain player, or a player in the 10 to 15 range looking at their board going, hey, all of our first round grades are gone, but this draft is deep, so let's bail out, see if we can pick up some extra picks. So there could be a match there. And now, because there's an extra second, an extra third, an extra fifth, even an extra seventh, that can come in handy later, the Seahawks have more flexibility this year. It's an easier thing to bite off, because as in normal years, you want to go from 18 to 12. It will cost you a third and more, maybe, but that would leave you without a third. See what I'm getting at? So this year you have extra picks. It becomes a luxury. You can use the assets attained in the DK and Geno trade to maybe parlay it into a player that you believe has all pro potential. And that's the only reason you would move up here, right? So let me do that first, actually. Let me go back here. In my opinion, there's only two guys worth trading up for. And that's Tyler Warren and Will Campbell. A couple of you have already mentioned these guys in the comments. Tyler Warren, to me, you can make a case for Colson Loveland too, although Warren is a better blocker and he's bigger. Tyler Warren projects as an all-pro tight end. And while the consensus among the fan base might be tight end's a luxury, anytime you have a chance to acquire someone that could be a perennial all-pro, a game-changing type player, a guy that defenses would have to game plan for, and a guy that fits absolutely perfectly into your scheme, because we know that Clint Kubiak likes to run a lot of 12 personnel, quite a bit of 13 personnel, likes to run the ball, likes those two-way tight ends. He's a weapon in the pass game, but he's a very, very good blocker in the run game as well. He's one, and then Will Campbell. And if you're saying to yourself, oh, Will Campbell, he's going to go in the top 5 or 6, right? Things have changed in the last couple of weeks. Armand Membu has overtaken Will Campbell on all the consensus big boards as the first tackle, and now you're seeing him mocked as high as 4 to New England or 5 to Jacksonville. If he gets by those two, it's unlikely that he gets past Pete and the Raiders at 6, unless they're dead set on going Ashton Genty or maybe a quarterback. So those are the only two. And I just put those up there to give you some perspective on why you would trade up. So now let's do this. This is what I've put together. And I use, whenever I'm doing these mock trades, I use the draft charts. I don't like to just wing it. Like some people do that, top of their head, they'll go, just give them a 5th to move up to, well, sometimes it doesn't match on the trade chart. Then there's a couple different trade charts. There's the Jimmy Johnson trade chart. He's the first one that really came up with this. And then all the teams kind of started to adopt it and use it. And then I use the Rich Hill trade chart, which it's through Draft Tech. They developed it about 10 years ago. And what it does, it takes the same concept as the Jimmy Johnson trade chart, but it actually incorporates data from the last 10 years on actual trades, like what trades have actually netted, and then it compiles all that. And, with each year, you get more of a sample size and you get more accurate. And then there are some teams that have adopted their own, and they don't share those, and so we don't really know. But there's, I saw a report 2 drafts ago that as many as 10 teams, a third of the teams in the league, still actually use the Jimmy Johnson chart as a go-to. I use the Rich Hill chart. I think it's a little tighter. It's a little more conservative. The Jimmy Johnson trade chart is a little too aggressive for me. But this is what I came up with. So if they just want to move up from 18 to 17, you can see right here, it would cost them 5th round pick, the higher of their 2 5th round comp picks, 172. Now, why would you move up to 17, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense, but we've seen teams do it. Usually at the top of the draft when a team wants a quarterback and they just want to assure themselves that, hey, even though this team right in front of us doesn't need a quarterback, and they're telling us that they're not going to take a quarterback. I just want to make sure that someone else doesn't come in at the last second and trade above us and get a player that we want. So if you want to move up one spot, it's going to cost you a 5th round pick. If you want to move up to 16, and the reason I have an asterisk there is because that belongs to Arizona. Teams typically don't love trading with each other on draft day within the division. But we know that Arizona's GM, kind of like young John Schneider, early John Schneider, loves to trade down and accumulate picks. He's done a lot of it his first 2 years. Monty Austin Fort down there in Arizona. He might, they might see that at this stage of the draft that it's not that impactful and they'd rather have the extra picks. It would cost that same 5th, 172 plus a 7th. To go to 15th, it would cost you a 4th rounder, number 137, plus a 5th, plus a 7th. You want to go to 14, it's going to cost you a 6th, or I'm sorry, I can't read my own typing. To go to 14 is going to cost you 3rd, but you're going to get one of their 6th rounders back as well. And by the way, every single one of these is within 2 points on the Rich Hill trade chart. So almost exact matches. And sometimes the demand is so great that teams will overpay. And sometimes they'll underpay just because they want to get out of a spot so badly, they'll take a little bit less. But these are all almost exact matches. And again, you can alter these formulas by involving future draft picks, but they're not as easily targeted or quantified on the chart. And also, as I said earlier, I think you're going to see a real unwillingness across the league to give up future draft picks this year because next year's draft is considered to be so much stronger. You want to move all the way up to 13. It's going to cost you your lower 3rd, number 92, plus your lowest 5th, 175. You want to move up to 12, the higher 3rd, which is the one that we got from the Raiders in the Geno Smith trade, plus your lowest 5th. 3rd and a 5th to get up to 12. 11, I didn't even look that up because that's the 49ers, and that's a case where there's no way that they're going to consider moving back and giving us 11, knowing that we're going to move up and take a good player. And then there's 10, and you can see how complicated this starts to get, and this is kind of why I cut it off at 10. It's going to cost you your highest 2nd, your lower 3rd, so it's going to cost you a 2nd and a 3rd round pick to get to 10, but per the trade chart, you should get back a 3rd in exchange plus a 7th. So it's a pick swap in the 3rd. You're going to move up 20 spots. You'll get the 10th pick. You move up 20 spots to 72, but you give up 52 and 233. That just shows you the value on these trade charts of a 2nd round pick, right? So if you have a chance to get Will Campbell, and again, let me address this. Why Will Campbell? Why would he possibly start to slip? You've heard about the arm length thing, right? It's gotten to be such a big storyline that Will Campbell himself at his pro day came out and addressed it and said, my entire life, no one's ever questioned my arm length. They've just seen the performance on tape. No sacks allowed. Like outstanding left tackle in the SEC going against some of the best edge players in the country. No sacks. Nobody questioned my arm length. All of a sudden, now they measure my arms. They're 33 inches. They prefer 34 or 35. So now I'm not a tackle. It's ridiculous. There's a couple of things at play here. One is arm length does matter to some teams. Some teams may be willing to overlook it. Some teams might not. Now, even the people that think his arm length may impact his ability to stay on the edge, they all agree that if he were to move inside to guard, the ceiling's unlimited. That this guy could be an absolute Joe Tooney, perennial all-pro type left guard. And so that's why there would be appeal to the Seahawks. And also, we know that they met with Will Campbell at the Combine. Why would they meet with someone if they're going to be out of reach? If they're convinced, and I know the Combine was almost a month ago now, and so, things change. But why would you interview someone that you don't think you're going to have any shot at drafting? Because A, They have reason to believe there's a scenario where Campbell might slip a little bit. B, they like him. And C, he might slip into the point where it does make sense for them to go up and get him. And Campbell would be the perfect, I don't think we've talked enough about him on this show just because I don't think he's going to be available, but this gives us the opportunity to do that. You listen to this dude talk and you hear teams that have interviewed him talk about him, and he's the perfect offensive lineman. And he has some of those characteristics that I've talked about that are lacking on this group. This group is too young. You're going to have to add another young player to it. They tried to get a veteran. It didn't work out. But a guy like Campbell brings a nastiness and a blue-collar mentality. Like, all this guy wants to do is play football and destroy you on the football field. The other advantage he gives you is, let's say you did something like this, right? If he slipped to 10th, and this is what I want y'all to say down in the comments. If he slipped to 10th and you knew you could get him by giving up one of your seconds, you'd still have a second, giving up one of those, and you still get to move up in the third as well. To get him at 10, knowing he's plug and play as a rookie at left guard, he instantly elevates the play of that line. You start to dream now on Charles Cross and Will Campbell on the left side, Olu or Jalen Sundell at center, Christian Haynes at right guard, a healthy Abe Lucas at right tackle. Is that something you can get excited about? But then also, let's say you decide to move on from Abe Lucas after his rookie year. You're just not sure about the long-term stability of that knee. Is that going to be a degenerative thing, right? Is that worth investing in? Boom. You move Will Campbell over to right tackle, and there you go. And then in the meantime, in the background, you're developing Satawa Lamea, Anthony Bradford, Jalen Sundell, whatever. You're getting to where you're one of those teams that's known perennially as an offensive line. And what do those teams do? We see the Philadelphia Eagles do them. They're always developing guys in the background. So when you lose a Jason Kelsey, you have a Cam Jurgens. Right? Would you do that? I would. For a player like... Whoops. There we go. So that's what I had. Now, a number of you have also asked about trading down. Well, that's another episode. Okay? And that one, I'll pick a couple, and there are a couple of teams that match up perfectly for potential need that they might want to come up for, and also where they have the draft capital that matches up. If you haven't played around with these trade charts, I highly suggest you do. Go to Draft Tech, or just Google it. You can Google the Jimmy Johnson one or the Rich Hill one, but they're both interactive. And so what they allow you to do is you type in the abbreviated name of the team that you want to trade with, and it highlights all of their picks so you can easily see. And then you'll just see, okay, the Seahawks have, their pick is worth 200 points, and they want to move back with Green Bay, and theirs is worth 100 points. So it's a 100-point difference. Then you go add up the rest of their picks and see what adds up to 100. That's how it works. They're really fun to play around with. So that way, instead of just like off the top of your head going, why don't we move back with this team? Well, sometimes it doesn't match. Sometimes you suggest moving back with a team and they don't have a second rounder. They don't have a third or a fourth rounder. But it also helps you to see what the value of each pick is. I hear this a lot. Like, well, let's just move back 5 or 6 spots and get an extra second. Well, it doesn't bring you a second to do that. So play around with those. Have a lot of fun with them. We'll talk about trading down. You know what? Screw it. Tomorrow. We just programmed tomorrow's show together as a team. I like that. This is the Seahawks Forever community, right? Oh, man. What time is it? Wow. I have the Mariner game on over here. It's already the 6th inning, and we're an hour into it. Wow. Mariners down 2-0 in the 6th. Bummer. Okay, so tomorrow we'll look at 3 or 4 trade down scenarios to pick up extra picks. I know that's been a popular choice, especially as a lot of you are getting really sophisticated and really educated on this draft class. A lot of you are coming to me and going, hey, the talent level's really even. I don't think you lose much going from 18 to 23 or 24. Let's pick up an extra late third or a couple of day 3 picks or whatever, right? It's a lot of fun. It just gives you, it's another tool that just allows you to kind of get into the process a little bit deeper. Let's see, where are we at here, you guys? Let's see who we got. If I could just find the right page. My goodness. Here we go. Here we go. We got a lot of good discussion here already. Go. Okay. Dune says, whatever we do, I trust John Schneider, Mike McDonald, and Clint Kubiak. Whew, there's some people that don't. I'll tell you that. I'm going to go up here because you guys are really having some great. I love the discussions that happened in the comments. And this is really what I love about the community that we've built here is it used to just be that when I'd go into the comments, it was all just questions and comments for me. And now y'all are just having your own conversation. It's really cool. The Hawks trade up with the Dolphins at 13. This is an idea from Dan Conroy to snipe Tyler Warren from the Colts. Warren has been matched to the Colts in just about every mock draft you'll see. We get our tight end / fullback. Yeah, Tyler Warren, that's another thing I didn't mention. He's a versatile player. He's more than just a tight end. He played quarterback in high school, and they've used him as a wildcat quarterback at Penn State. He'll run the football. He'll be a lead blocker, very Taysom Hill-ish. We get our tight end fullback and get $9 million in extra cap space. Dan, are you talking about moving on from Noah Fant, cutting Noah Fant if we get Tyler Warren? That could be in play. It'd be a kind of shitty thing to do to Fant, wouldn't it, to carry him like this whole way, only to cut him after the draft? I think he'd have a decent market. But yeah, that's certainly a possibility. I have had people suggest that we should trade Noah Fant, to which I've said there just isn't going to be a market because this tight end class is so good as a whole, which could also be an argument for not trading up to get Tyler Warren. Like, you're not going to get Tyler Warren later, but you could get Elijah Arroyo. You can get Mason Taylor. Like, there's some really good tight ends in this draft, you guys. But yeah, you could certainly cut Noah Fant. You could try to trade him. There just isn't going to be a market because it's a $13 million cap hit. And, well, for the acquiring team, I think it'd be closer to 9 or 10 because the Seahawks are on the hook for the signing bonus. But also because it is such a good tight end class. You're not going to go out and trade for a $9 or $10 million 28-year-old tight end when you can dip into a really, really good tight end class on day 2 and get a guy with $1.5 million cap hit that's 6 years younger. I just don't think there's going to be a market. If they were to end up with a Tyler Warren or a Colson Loveland or even, Arroyo or Taylor, and they feel good enough about that position with A.J. Barner and Brady Russell and the guy they just picked up from the Niners, who signed for a little bit more than the veteran minimum. I do think he's in their plans, especially because Clint Kubiak has familiarity with him. You can save that money by moving on from Noah Fant. Let's see. I mean, Nicholas says it's highly unlikely we trade up. You're right. He's never done it. Ever. We can talk about sticking and picking, and as we get closer to the draft, I always make a couple of predictions. I'll always have a list of my guys, which this year I'm going to expand that so that I'll have my guys layered throughout every single one of the 7 rounds, like favorite Seahawk fits that I have in each round. I'll also come out with a list of players that I would stick and pick for. Last year, Byron Murphy was absolutely one of those. And in fact, I was just playing with this. Let me download this real quick. I just wanted to show you guys. Oh, it's not going to be on here. I was just looking back at my my final mock draft from last year, which I'll do the week of the draft, where that's my official prediction. Up until that point, I like to play with scenarios. What would I do? Let's try this. Let's try that. But then a couple of days before the first round of the draft, I'll do my official prediction where I kind of go through with it with everything that I know about the class and who's visited with them and what their needs are and guys that I think have Seahawks characteristics. And I'll make my official prediction. And last year I had Byron Murphy at 18 or 16 and I was so close in the 3rd round. I didn't think Christian Haynes would be there at 81. Nobody did. So I went with Dominic Pooney instead. He ended up going like 5 picks later to the 49ers. So close. And then the rest of the draft wasn't even in the ballpark. But yeah, I'll do a list of stick and pick guys, and then I'll do my official mock draft. But right here, John says if they stay at 18, then they should take Zabel or Mike Green. Mike Green's fascinating, and I actually spent quite a bit of time today focused on watching edge player tape. And it's kind of funny. There's a couple of schools that you can knock out. You can check off a bunch of boxes all at once. So I was watching Texas A&M tape so that I could watch Shamar Stewart, Nick Scorton, and Shamar Turner all at the same time. And then you turn on the tape for Ole Miss, and you can watch Jared Ivey, Princely, Uman Milan, and Walter Nolan all at the same time too. So you can kill 6 birds with one stone. But I got an up close look at Mike Green in Mobile those first 2 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, when he was so dominant, and then he did so much that he just decided to leave and call it a day. He's got short arms, but man, I don't think it impacts him at all. He is the most explosive edge player in this class. If he was a clean prospect, I would say 2 things. A, he ain't getting to 18. And B, if he's at 18, the Seahawks stick, pick, sprint to the podium, turn the pick in. They still might. It's just that Mike Green has a couple of sexual assault issues in his background, one in high school, one in college. It's what caused him to have to transfer from Virginia to Marshall. He's been very open about it. He's tackled it head on, but that's not nothing, but it isn't always enough to make teams feel better about him too. And so he's going to be one of the most fascinating stories for me on draft day is where does he go? How do teams view him as a person? We know how important that is to the Seahawks. They wouldn't draft Jalen Carter at 5 when he was absolutely fit the biggest need on the roster, and there was no question about the physical profile. But they had a question about him as a person, and they passed on him. Took Devin Witherspoon instead. How are they going to feel about Mike Green? If he's on their draft board, he is absolutely in play at 18 if they stay there. Zabel, I'm not so sure on. Not because they don't like him. I can absolutely see them loving Gray Zabel, having him graded very, very highly on their board. We know they met with him at the Combine. We know they saw him up close at Mobile. You know, I've talked about that first day of practices, the American and national team on Tuesday at the Senior Bowl, that John Schneider's eyes were glued to the offensive line drills and the work they were doing the whole day. It's all he watched. So they're obviously going to know Gray Zabel quite well. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up on the 30 visit list too and bring him out again. The reason I say I'm not sure if he'd be the pick at 18 is because of the depth in this class. When you think about what's the fall off from if I pass on Zabel here, but I know I can get Tate Ratledge at 50. What's the difference between Zabel and Ratledge versus if I go Mike Green or Donovan Ezeraku or Shamar Stewart or like one of these edge players that they think is going to be a big-time player, or one of the defensive tackles, Kenneth Grant, who's kind of been my favorite pick at 18 to this point, a guy that we think can be a game wrecker. If I pass on that, if I take Zabel or Donovan Jackson or one of the other guards, right? Kelvin Banks, if he falls to 18, take your pick. The difference between the caliber of player you're going to get at 50 on the defensive line is significant. You're not getting anything close to a Mike Green or a Donovan Ezeraku at 50. Most likely. There's a couple of guys, obviously, that will have great careers. You know how I love Femi Oladejo. Maybe he's an example of a guy you can get that way. But for the most part, the drop-off is so much less severe on the interior offensive line in this particular class. That's why they might go with someone else. But Zabel's absolutely going to be on my stick and pick list. He's a guy that if they just stay there at 18, they take Gray Zabel. We all celebrate for the whole night, and then we go into day 2 with no pressure. And we just get to have fun and take whoever falls to us, right? Brandon says Warren is really the only one that makes sense to trade up. I do think Campbell does too. I think he's that good. I think Campbell's better than Gray Zabel. You stick him at guard. He's a dominating player right away. Like, he elevates that team. If Will Campbell is starting at left guard for the Seahawks as a rookie, I would venture to guess that the majority of their runs are going to go off the left side as opposed to the right side. He's just that good, and he's such a great pass protector. My goodness, people talk about the stance that can be fixed. Not a big deal. HMYIZ, don't know how to pronounce that. Sorry, don't want to try and butcher it. I would trade up for Membu if he's there. This might have made sense about a month ago, but he's a top 5 player now. He's not getting past Jacksonville at 5, and I think he very likely may end up, depending on the quarterbacks, as high as 4. If quarterbacks go 1 and 2, if Ward and Sanders go 1 and 2, then Membu makes it to 5 because Carter and Hunter are going to go some order of 3 and 4. But I think to trade up to get Membu, now you're talking future first, and I don't want any part of that. I am not giving up a first-round pick in next year's draft. There is no way. I would be livid. I'd be livid if that happened. If the Seahawks traded up to 6, gave up a future first to get Armand Membu, I would come on my reaction show that night, and I would be super excited about Membu as a player, and then I would rip them for their process, because the difference between Armand Membu at 6 and something you could get at 18 or even 50 is not, it's just not that wide. It's not worth giving up a future first for, so I'm just not touching that. Warren's got Hall of Fame career written all over him. He'll be better than Brock Bowers. He's a better blocker. Bowers is a much better blocker than people give him credit for just because of his physique. I think they assume he can't block. But yeah, Warren's just a bigger, stronger player. I believe he'll end up being a Gronk, Kelsey type player. Actually, the most common player comp for him, although I do hear a lot of Gronk, is George Kittle. Because Kittle's a guy that's such a weapon, such an asset in the running game as a blocker. But also, we've seen what he can do as a pass catcher too. Nicholas Newton says Zabel's an early second-round pick. He's not getting out of the first. He is not getting out of the first round. Christopher Cleveland says, I've never been a fan of trading current draft assets. I'm okay with future assets to move up. I love having 10 draft picks, especially with how few players we have under contract after the season. And that's a really good point. The Seahawks are close to, having their roster filled out. I think, was it Bob Condotta I was reading today in the Seattle Times was saying that, if they just stay where they are right now and they take 10 players in the draft, that'll leave them with about 10 open spots. That'll get them to about 80 on their roster. And they usually sign between 10 and sometimes as many as 18 undrafted free agents. So that would only leave them 10 undrafted free agent spots, which also essentially means they're done in free agency. They might add another depth player here or there on a minimum deal. But they're not going to really do anything of significance. They're running out of roster spots. So, but you're right. They have their core. They have a lot of young players that are under contract for 26 and 27. But they only sign these 3-year deals. They don't do 5, 6, 7 year deals like other teams. And so it's just the churn is a little bit more consistent, and you have to plan for that. I was having a conversation with somebody on Twitter today where they didn't like some of my ideas for potential first round picks because they didn't think they would be bona fide every snap starters as rookies. And I just thought that was a very, very strange way to approach the draft because, first of all, Seahawks have a good roster. There aren't a lot of spots that are open, right? The defense is taken care of. There's 13 players on defense that started games last year. Like, it would be hard for them to take a rookie at 18 and have him crack the starting lineup on defense. On offense, obviously, there's opportunities at wide receiver, tight end, offensive line. It's a little bit different. But it's also harder to get on the field as a rookie on offense. So the learning curve is just a little bit higher. Right? On defense, you can just put a guy out there on third down or whatever in a rotational role, pin your ears back, go get that guy. On offense, it's a little more intricate. And so I just thought that was such a weird way to look at it. And I, debated him a little bit on it. It was a very, very tactful, friendly, respectful debate. I just said, you just can't look at the process that way. you have to draft for now and later. So good point, Christopher, that, this might be a year where it makes sense to get some extra picks. Because of the depth in talent through the top 100, 120, just tap into as much of that as you can. Give yourselves as many opportunities to find blue chip players as you can, but also have guys under 4-year contracts so that your roster, when you start looking at 26 and 27, starts to fill out a little bit. Dogzilla Monster, thank you for the super chat. Who is Schmagetti? Prospect John Schneider mentioned on 710. I think I'm getting to learn your sarcastic sense of humor, so you know who Joe Schmagetti is. He is a fictitious player, but he also represents just any Joe Schmo who's ever put on a helmet that you might want to talk about in any way, shape, or form. It was Bob Stelton brought that up when he was talking to Schneider the other day. I thought that was pretty funny. Joe Schmagetti may have, I don't know if Bob knew what he was starting. I think Bob Schmagetti might gain a life all of his own. A little bit of a legendary fictitious player person moving forward. Kevin Mullen, thanks for the super chat. For $4.99 donation with 10 picks, no reason to trade down unless ridiculously overpaid. Question, safeties, Jay Sanker or Kevin Winston in the fourth? Is third safety a need for Mike McDonald defense? It absolutely is. We know he likes to play 3 safeties. That's why they went out and made it a priority last year to require not just Rashawn Jenkins, but also Kayvon Wallace, because he likes to play 3 safeties. Sometimes that third safety is a box safety that plays essentially a big slot, which I'm in favor of because it would allow Devin Witherspoon to play more outside. You've heard me talk about that. That's why I do think a Malachi Starks or a Nick Emenwari could be in play at 18. I do want to address a couple of things in your question here. First of all, Kevin Winston is someone that I was slow to get to because of the ACL. He didn't play last year. I think he played 4 games, and then he had the ACL injury. But he's a guy that 2 years ago was being talked about as a first-round talent. Now, he had his pro day today, ran a 40, 6 months after ACL surgery, ran a 4.5 at 6'1", and I think 215. Thinking about Winston, I think he's a dynamic player, and I think he would be in play at 18 if he hadn't gotten the ACL. I think he'd be right up there in the conversation of first safety taken off the board. So for that reason, because of, tape, scouting reports, and grades that teams probably had on him last year, 2023, I don't think he gets to the 4th. I think he's a day 2 player, especially now that he's, if he checks out medically, he's out running 40s. But Kevin Winston's a box safety only. You don't want him covering the back half. But there is a role for that in McDonald's offense. It's essentially a hybrid role where you're almost a third linebacker too. They used Kyle Hamilton kind of in that role in Baltimore. They used, Malik Harrison as a linebacker / edge, but he would drop into coverage. He likes that versatility. He likes where everybody can play everything. And I think Winston would make a lot of sense there. Sanker, I haven't studied deeply yet, so I'm not as familiar with his game. Lathan Ransom is another guy out of Ohio State that I think would fit that role really nicely. I think Sebastian Castro, if you want some value, he might be a 4th rounder out of Iowa that could fit that role as well. But I want to address the first part of this. With 10 picks, no reason to trade down unless it's an overpay. Except in this scenario. You look up at your board, you're sitting at 18, you're on the clock, you look up at your board, you don't have any first-round draft picks left or draft grades left. You don't have any. All your first-round grades are off the board. And so as you look at your board and you see the top player on your board and the 10th player on your board have the same grade, why wouldn't you trade down if someone wants to come get it? You might even make the phone call and try to trade down to get extra picks, especially if you're thinking about maybe taking a developmental quarterback. We just want to add an extra pick so it doesn't really impact our search for other needs. That's where it does make sense. Absolutely would make sense to get more picks. If you know that you can move back 5-6 spots and get the same level of player, if not the exact same player that you would get at 18, then why wouldn't you? Thank you for the donation. I really appreciate it. And the question. Anthony Lux asks, does Pete Carroll take Nick Emenwari in the first round if he was willing to give up 2 firsts for Jamal Adams? Big smiley face. Not at 6. Trust me, if Pete was in the teens, goodness, I think he'd probably, I bet the Raiders have a big fat grade on Emenwari, but 6 is high for a safety. Really, really high. Especially a guy, there's questions about Emenwari. He's not a perfect prospect, you guys. Forget about the Cam Chancellor comps, right? He's not, and forget about the Kyle Hamilton comps. His instincts aren't as good as Hamilton, and he doesn't hit like Cam Chancellor. He's kind of in between those guys a little bit, or just a notch below both of them. Outstanding athlete, and there's some cool reps on tape. A lot of upside. If they took him at 18, my instant reaction would be a first-round safety. Dang it. But then I would immediately get behind it because it would mean that McDonald loves him and has a plan for him. But 6, now, if I'm the Raiders, I'm trying to trade down. And they might have an opportunity because if somebody wants that third quarterback, because now it's back to sounding more and more like Sanders and is going to go in the top 2 or 3. He's not getting past the Giants at 3, right? All that talk, I think, of him falling significantly is overblown, and it seems like now it's overcorrecting the other way. But if there's a quarterback needy team that wants to get ahead of the Jets because they're going to take Jackson Dart at 7, then 6 could be in play. And if I'm the Raiders, I'm trying to move back. They just have so many needs. And yeah, you might miss out on Ashton Genty. Okay, your consolation prize is a Marion Hampton or Travion Henderson, like Caleb Johnson. It's such a good running back class that I'd be bailing out of that pick if I could. And then maybe you do trade down in the teens, and Emenwari would make a ton of sense. Then you get your running back in the second round, and you build up that offensive line. You add a couple of receivers, off you go. Kick Up says, about to go out to dinner. Sorry we missed you. Also, apologize to those of you trying to watch the Mariner game. Where are we at? God, these games. I love the rules to shorten the game, but sometimes they go by too fast. It's like, it's 8:22, and we're already in the 7th inning. By the way, speaking of the Mariners, I've had some conversations the last couple of days. This was actually a suggestion from a viewer on Twitter. Can't remember who it was. Sorry, or I would give credit where it's due. Somebody suggested, because I was talking about Mariners the other day. I used to talk about the Mariners in an older podcast where I would do more than just Seahawks stuff. How about Mariners Forever? And I'm giving it serious consideration to starting a second channel. Basically the exact same feel and kind of theme and mission statement of this channel, but talk about the Mariners. Not as often, twice a week, maybe. Get my old friend Michael Thompson, who's written about the Mariners for years, involved as well. Let me know down in the comments if you would support that, what you think of that idea. John says, who cares what Pete does now? He ain't our coach anymore. I think a lot of people care. A lot of them do. I know I'm going to be watching Raider games this year, man. I'm fascinated to see how he does. I love that man. It was time to move on. I was behind the decision, or I wasn't behind it. I wasn't the one that fired Pete Carroll, you guys. I promise. I supported the decision, and even preceding it, asked for it, said it was time. But I'll always have an affinity for that guy. He'll always be on my Mount Rushmore of Seattle sports. Charlie the Unicorn says, Dart's the only player I could see a team wanting to trade up into 18. Well, I wouldn't say the only player, because again, when you have a class like this that's so level in talent, it's all about need and desire, right? Scheme fit. What do you need? What do you value? There could be a team that thinks so highly of Malachi Starks, for example, who's been mocked in the top 10 at times, that they don't think he's going to be there past 18. He probably won't be. And so, okay, we're going to go get that guy because we think he can be a dynamic piece of our defense. Any of the offensive linemen, it's like flavor of the month, right? If there's a team that thinks that Kelvin Banks is someone they need to go get, and they don't want to risk having him get past 18. I could see him moving up and getting that guy. The wide receivers, it's not a very good group at the top, right? James talked about that yesterday. It's a good day 2 group, but if you're a team that absolutely believes in Tet McMillan or Luther Burden or Emeka Ibuka and you don't think he's going to get past 18, of course you're going to trade up. It only takes one. It's about what you need. It's about what you desire. And in a year, I keep saying this, but in a year where there's only, 8 to 10 first round grades on most teams' boards, if you're sitting there and you're at 20 and 9 of your 10 first round grades are off your board and there's one left, hell yes, you're going to try and trade up and get that guy, because the way you've graded it, you have to trust your process. All the work that went into building your draft board, and you've graded that player as a first round pick, and he's the only one left on your board, you're absolutely going to try and trade up to get that player 100 times out of 100, even in what's regarded as a weak draft. Again, though, you're not going to give up a 1 next year. You're not going to do it. And so I think that will limit some of these trades. You're not going to see the big trade. You're not going to see like when Kansas City went from, 25th all the way to 10th or 24th to 10th to get Mahomes. Like, that's not going to happen this year. But, 20 to 15, yeah, I think there'll be some movement. Kick Up asks, is this live or a premiere? So I wish there was a way it was more obvious, to be honest. I've thought about putting a graphic up that says live, but then as soon as we're done and it lives on the YouTube page, then it's going to continue to live there as well. But I have noticed that when I go to watch either a live premiere, which is a pre-recorded video, but it's premiered live so we can chat about it, it kind of looks the same, doesn't it, on the YouTube page? Stick and Pick Loveland says Charlie the Unicorn. So he could be in play at 18, absolutely. And I do think he's going to be there at 18 because of the shoulder surgery. Labrum surgery doesn't sound like he's even guaranteed to be back for week 1. Different player than Warren, right? More of a dynamic, like elite level receiver who he can block. He can get in a guy's way. He's a capable blocker, but he doesn't give you what Tyler Warren does. He's not as big a player. I'm not saying he's as good, but he's more like Brock Bowers stylistically than he is like Tyler Warren. But I think he's going to be there at 18 because of the injury. So that'll be a really interesting test. If they're satisfied at the medicals, and we know how discerning the Seahawks are and how tight they are sometimes on medical issues. But if they get everything back before the draft and they're confident that shoulder's repaired and he's going to be good to go, I could see him being the pick at 18 because he's a good example of a guy that they might very well have a first round grade on, and he might be the last guy left on their board at 18. And just a dynamic, you talk about replacing DK Metcalf. I always use the Moneyball analogy, right? Where they lost Jason Giambi. You can't replace Jason Giambi. We don't have the money to go get him. We don't have a guy like that in our system. So what did they say? What's the line for Moneyball? We're going to replace him in the aggregate, right? And so in part, you replace DK Metcalf's production with Cooper Kupp, hoping he can stay healthy. You can manage that. And he can use his ability to get open in the middle of the field. You're going to, in part, make up for that with an expanded role for JSN. In part, you're going to make up for that on certain downs, red zone, 3rd and long, with Marquez Valdez-Scantling as a deep threat and a big, tall receiver with a big catch radius. You're going to make up for that a little bit with a rookie receiver, although we know what the learning curve is for those guys, and sometimes they don't hit right away as rookies. But also, because Kubiak likes to use 2 and 3 tight ends as much as he does, you can make up for that DK Metcalf production with your tight end room as well. And if you add a guy like Loveland, who's so dynamic as a pass catcher, he can split out wide. He could be a real wild card in this draft. As much as I do think the emphasis in the top 100 picks for this team is going to be in trench players and in players that are going to contribute to the identity of the team, like physical, nasty, tough, a guy with Loveland's ability at 18 might be way too much to pass up, especially given the fact that if he's 100% healthy coming into the draft and there's no questions about the shoulder at all, he's probably gone in the top 12 or 13 picks too. Board Skylar says, if we got Zabel and Jackson in round 1 and 2, I'd be stoked. I could get behind this. As much as I have said, I don't like the idea of taking 2 interior linemen in those first 5 picks, because they have Anthony Bradford, Olu Oluwatimi, Jalen Sundell, Satawa Lamea, Christian Haynes. Those guys are less than 2 years in the league. They've just started their development. Interior offensive linemen take longer to develop. They had a terrible scheme last year, terrible coaches. They weren't put in a position to succeed, and this new staff is going to develop these players. Some of the solution is on hand already. So I don't like the idea of taking 2 pure interior offensive linemen in the first 92 picks. But Donovan Jackson's not a pure guard. What he showed in kicking out to left tackle when Josh Simmons got hurt a couple of weeks into the season last year for Ohio State, and playing left tackle and playing it well and measuring with left tackle dimensions, changed his entire profile. You could take Donovan Jackson and Gray Zabel, and because Zabel could play center or guard, so he's going to compete at both. He's probably, in this scenario, he's probably going to challenge at center. And then Donovan Jackson is going to challenge at left guard, probably win the job. So very likely, because I'm high enough on these 2 guys, I don't love the idea of 2 rookies starting on the offensive line. That's a recipe for potential disaster and starting the season really slow until these guys get their feet under them. Zabel in this scenario is probably playing center, competing with those guys. Jackson's competing at left guard, but then it gives you the flexibility if you move on from Lucas after next year, or if something happens with Charles Cross or he gets hurt, boom, there's your natural left tackle. You kick Jackson out there. He could be your long-term right tackle. And you let all those other guys battle for who takes his place if that happens. This is a combination I can get behind. The problem is Zabel is going to be in play at 18. Jackson's not making it to 50. So if you really are dead set on taking these 2 guys, you'd have to trade up to get the second one, whichever one fell. Yep, here's Dan. Dan Conroy, Loveland more likely to fall to 18 because of his injury. I wouldn't move up for him. I wouldn't either, but man, he's probably going to be on my list of guys to stick and pick for at 18. Brian Myers, again, I love talking about these just like philosophical and process questions when it comes to the draft. Tight end, not close to the best choice for this team at 18. It's going to be defense. You take the player that has the best chance to be a Hall of Famer, an All-Pro, a dominant player, regardless of the position. And 18, you're in no man's land. You're in the middle ground. The first round grades are gone. Most of them. So if you're considering between Kenneth Grant, who I love at 18, and Warren or Loveland, if you truly go best player available, you stick to your board, you take the highest graded player, even if it's a tight end. Now, John Schneider has said they do factor need into their grade and positional value into their grade. And so I do think in that scenario, Grant would be the choice. I would want him to be the choice in that case. I'm just saying, if Warren or Loveland gets to 18, it's not an easy choice. And it's a good enough draft. You can still turn around at 50, 52 and get a defensive tackle or an edge and an interior offensive lineman and be just fine. But I will say this, when I do mock drafts, the ones I like the most are the ones where I take Kenneth Grant or Donovan Ezeraku. When I take a defensive lineman first, the whole draft just works so much better. I can get my guard at 50. I can get my corner at 52 because corner drops off a ledge. And then in the 3rd round, I can go, there's a big clump of good receivers there before that ledge falls off. And then maybe you double back and you get another defensive player or another defensive lineman. Like, that's how I like it. It just sequences better that way. So your point is sound. And I agree with it for the most part. It's just when you say not close, prepare yourself, man. Colson Loveland could very, very easily be a Seattle Seahawk in a month. Misfit74 says trading up as high as 15 makes sense. Yeah, and it's not that much to give up. Let's look at that again. You want to move up to 15? Let's get this out of the way here. You want to go up to 15, it'll cost you a fourth, a fifth, and a seventh. Like that's a lot to give up. But if you look back at Schneider's history of moving up like into the second round, into the third round, some of those trades, he's packaging 3 or 4 picks, and 223, you're talking about the very end of the draft. And the fifth is a comp pick, right? So 3 day 3 picks, you would still have, here, let me pull up Tankathon here for a second. Just when you think you have everything memorized. Yeah, you give up a 4, a 5, and a 7, you still have, you're not going to have a fourth. That'd be the painful part. But you're still going to have a late fifth and a late seventh. Actually, that's tough. That would be a tough pill to swallow. That player better be somebody that you really have conviction on, because you're going to leave yourself with only 3 picks on day 3. But still, something to consider. And there's also, look, keep in mind that there's other ways that you can make these trades too. Let me put that up again. You could do the 4th and the 7th and a player, right? Or you could, when you get down into this part, like, what do they usually say? That a pick next year has 1 round less value, unless you're talking about the first. So, instead of a 5th this year, maybe you give up a 6th next year, right? Like a 4th and a 7th this year and a future 6th. You can play around with it like that. Or a player. They have, look, if they draft Gray Zabel, or if they draft any of those interior offensive linemen, or like the scenario we were just talking about, they get Donovan Jackson, Gray Zabel, okay. Anthony Bradford might have some value to a gap power team. Christian Haynes is tradable at that point. He was just the 81st pick a year ago. Like, Tao Lamea may have some value to a team that's needy on the offensive line, and aren't they all? Or even Michael Jarrell, who wants a developmental tackle. Like, you can play around with some of those scenarios as well. Brian Meyer says Nicholas. He's responding to somebody, right? Grant, Jihad Campbell, or Stewart. Grant's my favorite pick at 18 right now. I just think the sky's the limit. He's such a raw player, but that just makes him a better prospect in my mind, because you see the production and you see just the intensity and the motor and the athletic ability at 335 pounds. I think he'd be the perfect complement to Byron Murphy, and I think there's some untapped pass rush there too. Man, that defensive line could really be something. He's my favorite pick at 18. I don't think that's going to change between now and the draft. Jihad Campbell, I've talked about, very, very polarizing prospect among Seahawk fans, because some people just can't get over the fact that he's an off-ball linebacker, but he's not just an off-ball linebacker. He's a guy that can play on the edge, and some scouts actually think if you moved him full-time to the edge, like Micah Parsons, who he's built almost exactly the same as, very, very similar athletic profile, length, height, weight, the whole thing, that he can be a devastating edge player. And so if Campbell is in the mix here, it's because McDonald sees that kind of versatile, multifaceted kind of Swiss Army knife role. He's not going to take Ernest Jones' job. He's not going to play weak side backer. He's going to be your third linebacker. He's going to play that role that Malik Harrison played in Baltimore, if I'm not mistaken. Here's another vote for trading up ahead of the Colts to get Warren. Let's go back and look at that trade again, which, hang on here. So yeah, Miami sits at 13, as you said. And so if we go back here again and we look at this, and you want to go up to 13, you're giving up that's their native pick, right? Because of the Geno Smith trade, you still have 82. You're giving up 92, and you're giving up a 5th round comp pick. So you're giving up a 3rd and a 5th, a low 3rd and a low 5th to move up and get Tyler Warren if he's there at 13, because the Colts are going to take him at 14. And it makes sense for Miami too. You always want to look at the other side of these equations too, right? I mean, the Dolphins have a bunch of picks, a ton of picks. They don't need to trade back, right? They'd be getting an extra 3rd and a 5th. They have a 1st, a 2nd, a 3rd, 2 4ths, 2 5ths, and 3 7ths. So yeah, they might want to add two more, another pick on day 2 and another pick on day 3, because they just have so many needs there. I think Mike McDaniel's on the hot seat. Like, for all the talk of the offensive line here, like they've just let that, they let all their offensive linemen go out the door when their contracts are up. They've had no stability there. They don't know if Taron Armstead's going to continue at left tackle or if he's going to retire. Like, that's a year-to-year thing. And they need help on the interior offensive line. Their defensive line is not great. They need another corner opposite Jalen Ramsey. Like, they're set at inside linebacker because they have all the ex-Seahawks. But that could make sense. That could make a lot of sense for both teams. If he falls to 13 somehow because there's a run on, if more quarterbacks go than we expect, or we get a couple of surprises in the running back room, right? We saw the Lions do that a couple of years ago, right? And move all the way up, take a running back earlier than people expected. Once the runs start, it could happen, right? Crazy things happen. If Warren gets to 13, I hope they have a war room cam this year. They didn't last year, did they? Because sometimes you can see, like, oh, John's on the phone, or someone handed him a phone or whatever. I bet the Seahawks would be calling the Dolphins at 13. That being said, too, I bet Mike McDaniel would love himself some Tyler Warren and might not want to give that up, actually, in that offense. That might be kind of fun. I mean, they have Jonnu Smith, but he's pushing 30, right? A lot of good stuff here, you guys. Somebody answered. Seahawks fan 72 answered Dogzilla. Said, that's a fake player. Joe Schmagetti. We're going to have to use that, aren't we? Kevin Mullen, another donation. Thank you. He says $5 towards the Mariners channel. Okay. I appreciate the vote. I think it's going to happen. This is my focus. It would probably just be once a week. We've talked about maybe just doing Mondays and just kind of recapping the week, looking ahead to the week, talking about major issues. I would never do a daily Mariner podcast. This is always going to be the focus, but I think weekly and then reacting to big news would be a lot of fun. It'd be a lot of fun. I think there's a demand for it. So thank you. Question. How many offensive line picks does Seattle leave the draft with? I want 3. Lastly, is center a target by the end of day 2? Much love from San Diego. Thank you, Kevin. Great questions. 3 is my sweet spot. When I do mock drafts, I'm looking for 3 specific things. In the first 52 picks, I want my starting left guard. That's what I want. I want a plug and play stud left guard. It's a great draft for it. We're going to get one at 18 or 50. That's the way I do it. And then I'm waiting again until day 3. I am not double dipping in those first 5. There's other needs, and those other position groups fall off a cliff. Receiver and cornerback in particular, but also to some extent edge and defensive tackle. The ledge after day 2 is pretty severe. And so I'm getting one of them. I'm getting a receiver and I'm getting a corner on day 2. I'm waiting till day 3 because the class is still that good. And I'm taking another interior offensive lineman. And if the guy that I took early doesn't project to playing center at all, I'm taking one of these guys that can play center or guard. Jackson Slater, Clay Webb, Luke Kandra. Marcus Bowe isn't going to get there till the 3rd round, unfortunately, but guys like that could play center or guard. And then my 3rd pick is I'm taking a tackle. And ideally, I'm taking a tackle that I think could play either side. Someone as a long-term young swing tackle, what you were hoping Stone Forsythe was going to be, but he just didn't develop into that player. And there's a bunch of them on day 3 that I like. Logan Brown, Jack Nelson, Logan Brown from Kansas, Jack Nelson from Wisconsin, Jalen Travis from Iowa State. Because I don't see Mike Jarrell as a guy that can play the left side. I think he's right tackle only. But that's my perfect draft. Now, if you get dream scenario here that was suggested earlier, and you get Zabel and Donovan Jackson, well, that checks all the interior boxes. And so, then I'm just trying to get that tackle on day 3. And then to be more specific, is center a target by the end of day 2? Not specifically. If you're asking about a guy like Jared Wilson, unless they think he can play guard also, because I'm that high on Oluwatimi, and I'm even higher on Jalen Sundell. I've said it on the record. I'm going to stick to it. I think Jalen Sundell ends up at some point being the long-term starting center for this team. He's just a better athlete. He's an almost elite athletic profile at the center position, and perfect fit for the scheme, even more so than Oluwatimi. Oluwatimi's not going to be hard to beat out, but I think Sundell is the long-term guy. And so for me, I'm not targeting a center unless it's a guy that I think can play guard. That doesn't mean that they feel the same way. I've heard that they like Seth McLaughlin from Ohio State, who's coming off an injury. We know they've looked at Jackson Slater, whether that's as a guard or a center, I'm not sure. We know they've looked at Clay Webb, whether that's a guard or a center, I'm not sure. Jake Majors is a guy from Texas, another guy that I feel like just from his physical profile could play some guard, although he never has. And then who was the other guy that I think? Oh, Jonah Monheim from USC. I was really, really impressed with down at the Senior Bowl, and just looks like a guy that should be able to play guard too. So I want that kind of versatility. All right, let's go down and see what I've missed here. Love questions like this. Nick, cornerback day 2, Woolen's downfall is blown out of proportion somewhat. How many other corners do you have? You have Devin Witherspoon, who plays the slot. You have Reek Woolen. Who's your other starter? Nehemiah Pritchett? That's your third guy right now. Do you feel that good about him? Right? And if you don't believe, and I'm not saying Reek has had a downfall. There's some questions about whether he's a McDonald type of guy, and they're that happy with him, whether his style of play matches. But let's take the optimistic view. Reek goes out and has a great year. He's going to be a $90 million player. Can they pay him and Witherspoon at the same time? Probably not. But even if they can, you got to have more than 2. And Devin Witherspoon, as much as I want him to be, is not a full-time outside player. So who's your other corner? You have to get a corner that's starting caliber, or at least can develop into it shortly in this draft. And if you don't get it on day 2, day 3, I'm telling you, it's a graveyard of small slot guys. That's all it is. Any of the guys with length or physicality that can stick on the outside and play the style that Mike McDonald wants, you got to get them on day 2. We're talking about Trey Amos. We're talking about Azariah Thomas. We're talking about, is it Dorian Strong? I'm just going off the top of my head here. The kid from Iowa State. Those guys are gone after day 2. It's absolutely a need. Absolutely. Yeah, Josh Jobe. Thanks for reminding me of Josh Jobe. But is Josh Jobe a guy you can count on? Is he a guy you're hanging your hat on? Right? He was an undrafted free agent or practice squad player, signed a very, very minimum deal, right? They like him, but is he a guy you can absolutely count on to play every day outside? I think you can upgrade that position. And again, you need more than just 2. Kobe in a pinch. I don't want to see him on the outside again. And if that's your plan, that's a bad plan. If that's your plan over drafting a guy on day 2 with a ton of talent, I'm not saying force a need. I'm saying there's some really good corners there on day 2. If they take Azariah Thomas and you find yourself getting mad because you don't think cornerback is a need, take a breath and then go watch Azariah Thomas film. And then come watch my show and I'll tell you how good a player he is. Hairston's another guy from Kentucky. Yeah, thanks for reminding me of him. I think they've met with him too. Very aggressive. He's a guy that likes to come up and hit. I could see him fitting. Kobe Bryant's interesting too. The other Kobe Bryant, or is that who you were talking about, Nick? Were you talking about the other Kobe, the Kobe one from Kansas or Kansas State that went to the Shrine game? He's so skinny though, but he doesn't play like it. We could have 2 Kobe Bryants, and then you could be right. You put Kobe on the outside, and Kobe playing deep safety. Nate Shute says, I like Azariah Thomas. He's a really, really good player. He's a player that, like, for some reason, like there was, after the Senior Bowl, McShay was saying he thought he was going to get into the first round. He thought he was that good. But he's one of those guys that like, yeah, it's a 4.5 40, so you worry about deep speed or whatever. Just watch the tape. He was the best cover guy in Mobile, even in the one-on-ones, which are not built for the corner to ever win, because you're defending the entire field. He's really, really, really good. I would love to have Azariah Thomas. Also, shortly before the draft, I always like to try and do a perfect Seahawks draft where I don't use a mock draft simulator. I use the big boards. And to be honest, I'll probably use James Foster's big board this year. Again, go check that out, you guys. It's freaking amazing. And put together like perfect 10-pick Seahawk draft where every pick fits a need, either now or later, and is a Seahawk personality, character, person off the field, all that stuff. That's always fun to do too. Rainwater Games, in a perfect world, first 5 picks are tight end, wide receiver, guard, corner, center. I disagree on center. I do. Man, they're fine there. I'm not taking a center in the first 5 picks because he's not going to get on the field. Not even Jared Wilson. I don't think he's better than Olu or Sundell right now. I don't. And he's never played guard. I'm not taking a center in the first 5 picks. I'll take Jackson Slater or Clay Webb or Luke Kandra later. I'm just not. Those picks are too valuable. 5 picks in the first 92. They have to be at like positions that you absolutely need now and are going to need in the future. And I just think until they prove otherwise, I think those guys are fine. I really, really do. Yeah, Jason says it's not a deep corner draft. Must draft at 50 or 52. That's where the sweet spot is. There at 82 and 92, there will still be some guys. But 50 or 52, you're going to get some big time corners. Let's see. Lots of good stuff here tonight, you guys. Really, really appreciate the questions. I love the hypotheticals, like, hey, you're sitting here, you're sitting at this pick, this guy's there. Who do you take, right? So I was going to check in on my Mariners here. That's going to do it for tonight. Again, a couple of things that are coming up. So tomorrow, as you demanded, as requested, we'll do trade down scenarios. I'll come up with, let's say, 4 or 5 that make a lot of sense for both teams and that match on the trade chart. So I'll do that. And then next week, I'm going to start my divisional rankings series where I'll start to go position group by position group and do my top 5. And I'll skew it not just as top 5 best, but top 5 that will be attainable for the Seahawks and fit the Seahawks. So, for example, I'm not going to put Abdul Carter in my edge rankings because he's not going to be there at 18, right? The only exception that I do make when I'm doing my positional rankings is I will rank the quarterbacks from 1 to however deep I feel. I think last year I went 7 or 8 deep. Also, pat on the back. I had Jane Daniels ranked ahead of Caleb Williams last year as my number 1 quarterback. So I'll start doing that next week as well. And then I'm working on something really, really epic that I can't wait for you guys to watch. As soon as we get a time nailed down where we can all get together and do it, I will build a promo and promote the heck out of it. This is going to be a lot of fun. So I was going to do divisional draft previews with each of the other 3 division rivals, right? Guys that I have on the channel all the time. Walter Mitchell from the Red Rain podcast for the Arizona Cardinals. Rob Stats Guerrera from the Gold Standard Network for the San Francisco 49ers. And then, of course, Jake Ellenbogen for the LA Rams. I was going to do an individual show with each one of them, going over kind of how their offseason's gone, what they think their approach is going to be in the draft so that we can all just get to know our opponents, right? So much more fun. We are going to do a full mock draft for the whole division where each of those content creators then is the GM of their team. And we'll use the PFF mock draft simulator. We'll go through pick by pick and each of us will pick for our teams. It's going to be a ton of fun. I think we'll do it live. I think if we can get our schedules together, we're going to try to do it live. Don't hold me to that so that you guys can be involved. That'll be a lot of fun. And then it'll be streamed to all of their channels as well. It'll be a big event. Can't wait for that. So that's where we sit. In the meantime, as always, at Seahawks Forever on Twitter and Blue Sky. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notification of future episodes. All the other ways that you can support the channel are listed down below, as well as I will add that link. It's not there right now, but as soon as we're done here, I'll go add that link for James's big board. It's unbelievable, you guys. Really check it out. And then the one thing to know about that too is when you look at it and it populates, and you can sort it by age, height, weight, position, whatever. But then if you click on every row, because this isn't all that intuitive, you just click on the row, it'll bring up the full scouting profile with strengths, weaknesses, testing, agility, athletic scores, all that stuff. It's unbelievable, you guys. I can't wait to have James back on the show, and maybe even as a regular contributor. One of the really great up-and-coming young creators out there, and that's what I like to give time to on this channel. You know, it's some of those young guys that maybe you haven't heard of, but you're going to love getting their knowledge. So really, really appreciate it. Daniel says, F it, we'll do it live. Yeah, that'll be fun. That'll be a lot of fun. Jason Peters got one in just under the bell. Siobhan Ravel, that's the guy that I haven't mentioned at 50 because of the injury concerns coming off an ACL. Might have been cornerback 1 in this class. And so, you know, if his medicals check out, he still might end up going back in the first round because he's an old school Pete Carroll corner, 6'3", 210. Like, he's the whole package. If he's there at 50, you sprint to the podium and turn that one in. Just another example about a corner being there. So anyway, thank you to the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm happy to be a part of that. Until tomorrow, forever and always, go Hawks. Thanks for watching, you guys.